Hello and welcome to Sensei podcast. This is Manos Brilakis discussing with leaders in the field of CTO and complex PCI. Sensei means teacher or master in Japanese. The goal of the Sensei podcast is to help you learn and improve in CTO and complex PCI so that you can become the best that you can be and offer your patients the best possible results. Welcome everyone to Sensei Podcast. It is a great privilege to welcome Dr. Bill Nicholson from Emory University. Dr. Nicholson has a long-standing history of doing complex PCI and actually many other things, including TAVR and carotids. And he has taught thousands, literally, of people. So, Bill, thanks again and welcome.
Thanks, Manos. It's a privilege and always excited to be involved with anything with you. Thank you.
No, it's our privilege and a pleasure. And, you've been one of the first ones to get into this area of complex PCI that this is about. How did that happen for you? Did you just one day woke up and you want to do it, or how did this happen?
Yeah, it's an interesting pathway because, it really wasn't where I saw myself going. I think when you came out, and I think you were probably the same way, the field was sort of ill-defined, and you're interested in being kind of on the cutting edge of everything. And so when I came out, carotid stenting was really kind of the hot thing, and so I did a lot of work with simulation for carotid stenting, and then left atrial appendage came out, and I actually flew over to Germany with Jay Kotry to learn to do that from Horst Sievert, and did the first what it was an amulet back then, but it was did the first one of those in the U.S. and thought that's where I was going to go. And then Dimitri called me one day and said there's a guy, Lombardi, coming from the West Coast down to do retrograde CTOs at his institution. And we all flew in on our own dime. And it was unbelievable to see, like, when you saw for the first time, because we had never seen much in the way of retrograde. And, he was going retrograde and I saw him and met him. And I said, we flew down here on our own money. So all 10 of these cases are retrograde. And he did all 10 of them retrograde. And it was like coming out of a cave and seeing blue for the first time, like the fact that you're putting balloons up in the subintimal space and nothing happens. And it was a bug that caught you right then and there. I went back to do cases, and I was fortunate enough to have Tony DiMartini and Bill come quite a number of times. Bill came probably 6 or 7 times, became really good friends with my dad, who was one of my partners, and owe him a ton for the years for teaching. But it was just a different world at the time, and you were there from the inception, and so it grew tremendously over the years. But it was pretty rudimentary, I guess, to some degree when back in 2009, 10. So,
No, absolutely. I mean, it was impressive, and actually starting the whole thing. And I mean, there's excitement now, but I think the excitement back then was of a different magnitude, as you say. And you're right, Bill really created a lot of undercurrent that's really carrying us away to this day, actually.
Yeah, and then I tried to get out of it and try to go back to structural heart and started doing TAVR MitraClip, but it's like the mafia. Once you're in, you can't get out. So.
But actually, I must say, from all the people who do complexity, I think you're one of the very few ones who was able to combine doing complex PCI and doing structural and the thing. So how did that happen for you? Do you advise for other people? Is it something, you've been very experienced already? How would you experience?
It's an interesting thing. I did a lot of peripherals when I came out. So I was doing like 100 to 120 SFAs a year when I first started. And then as things came out, just from the nature of the practice I was in, there was always a welcoming to bring on new technology, but it was usually through some pathway that I was involved with. And structural heart, when TAVR first came out or first became available in the U.S., I think that's gone through quite an evolution as well. I think I've come to the realization, I did it up until I came here to Emory 3 years ago, and I was doing, a lot of fairly complex TAVR, and we're doing, paravalvular leaks and perc axillary TAVR and transcable TAVR. But, I think when you get to an institution like Emory, you have such expertise when you talk about that, guys like Adam Greenbaum and Vasilis Babliaris. It's kind of, it's hard to stay that on top of it. And I think, honestly, I think that the opportunity to kind of do structural heart and complex coronary is probably not the right way to go anymore. I've largely stepped out of the structural heart. I mean, I have so much respect for those guys and their skill sets. And I think for us to stay up to date, and how it changes so much in the complex PCI world, to just stay up to date in two fields like that, I think becomes pretty difficult. I think when it was early on and less, sort of, each of these fields now has become its own entity of its own. And so you occasionally, we have one of our fellows that's doing a structural heart year, and he's going to do chip with us next year. So I mean, there's some rare people out there that I think will still be able to do it, but to maintain that for a long period of time, I think it'd be hard to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I know you've done this for a long time and you're very experienced, but how do you prepare for every case? Do you have any special routine? Do you just look at the films? How do you do it right now?
That's a good question. I mean, it's still, as many as we've done, the CTOs and the complex PCI still get your attention. You still feel that in your stomach, before the case. And I still think about the cases the night before, and you still spend half the night thinking about it and dreaming about it when you do sleep. And so, I think you can't overemphasize the preparation that you need for it. I think that as they become more complex, you certainly need to do the legwork. I've always said that for years, that when I went and proctored, I was convinced I looked at the films more than the person I was proctoring most of the time before I got there. And, you need to be able to have plan A, plan B, plan C, and plan D. I think it's fun here because since I came to Emory, having the fellows to review that with, there's a lot of preliminary work that goes into that. So a lot of independent review with the fellows, but then we have a complex PCI review that we do, 1 to 2 days a week that we get to go through and hear like the expertise of guys like Dr. Jabber and Dr. Rinfrey that, you just can't beat having multiple opinions like that. And so that's really important. I think the other part that's important is the patient, kind of relationship with you, to have them understand that you're doing a complex, case. It carries with it an inherent increased risk. Usually these folks are at a stage where they're quite symptomatic and they've had, maybe been turned down elsewhere, or they're kind of at the end of their road. So they're often most appreciative and very receptive to the idea, but I think it's important that everybody is so quote unquote on the same page so they understand that this isn't just a standard, cath that you're doing. So I think a lot more goes into it. I'm not honestly as intense, I think, as everybody else that I run into about going through a whole different set of complication risks. I tend to be pretty much say that, the same things can happen. It just happen maybe about twice as frequently, but it's not something I have an overwhelmingly extra conversation. I certainly spend an overwhelmingly extra amount of time pre-reviewing the cases and planning.
Perfect. So despite all these thousands of cases you've done, you still look at the films again and again just to get ready for it.
You know how it is. That's what I said for years. Like, the CTO world, it's like golf. You never get the same shot twice. The weather's different. The hole's in a different position. You got to learn to hit all the bags in the club. There's so many different skills that you need. Standard TAVR is like bowling. It's the same ball, the same alley, the same pins. So it's a little different. But with CTOs, they never get easy. No matter how many. We're well into the thousands of CTOs, and there's always a point in the case where it's a little bit of a iffiness, and you're trying to figure out some ambiguity or figure out how you're going to get past a obstacle. And there's always that moment where your stomach still tells you. And so they never get easy. And it's probably why they're fun, to be honest with you. It's what keeps your attention there. And I think it's probably what's kept you interested and motivated through the years is the fact that there's so much heterogeneity to it and a lot of different skills to acquire, and hopefully changes in technology that make it a little bit more democratic.
Yeah, absolutely, and I couldn't agree more. But you mentioned about your stomach. So do you still feel anxious before a case? Do you still get nervous after all these cases? How does that work out?
Absolutely. I'm sure, hopefully I hide it well, but, absolutely. And there's no question, especially, live cases that you have, complex cases, patients that are, sick coming into it, that have bad EFs that are marginal, coming into it. It certainly gets your attention. I think the standard cases have become a little bit more, not so anxiety ridden, but it should be there. And I think if it's not there, I've always said that before, they talk about you can't work on your family members or famous people. If you are not the same degree of commitment and anxious about any random person on the table, it should be your approach to every case. It shouldn't matter who the patient is. I think the complexity of the case and the kind of perilous position that sometimes they come in as far as marginal and things like that should get your attention. But it definitely I still get anxious for sure.
Well, I think, a healthy degree of anxiety is good, right? If you're too relaxed, then that's when bad things happen.
That's 100% true, yeah.
But
Yep.
how do you remember the case? Like, there's some cases that shaped you, some case that you've done that you still remember to the day that really made you who you are? Or?
I remember cases I wish I had done something different, that's for sure. There's it's funny, the complications and the mistakes seem to impress in your brain and your memory a lot more than the good cases. But, I think that's also a strength. I mean, I think you really need to learn from your complications. You really need to perseverate on them. You really need a sounding group that you can show them, tell them, explain what you did and what should have been done differently. And there's many times that I've had recurrent scenarios play out that I had done the wrong thing once, but I won't do it a second time. And I think that's really where I think they're really important to learn from the mistakes. It's important to not run from them. It's important to not try to brush them under the carpet. I think some people like to try to pretend like it didn't happen. I think you need to be aggressive about really pursuing it and making sure you fully understand what you did wrong. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes there's things we don't know why things went bad, but for the most part, usually it's something that the operator did. And I think it would be a technical or a judgment decision. And I think as long as you're doing that aggressively, I think that's how you're going to continue to get better. I think from particular jumps in my kind of growth from good cases, most of that has come with collaborating with other operators. I remember a time at another institution when I was back in York, and I remember Lombardi was there, and I struggled with one thing, and you had him at the table, you watched him work a microcatheter through a septal differently than what I had done. We had done reverse card a little bit differently than what I was doing. And you pick up so much on those episodes. I remember having you down here to Emory and watching how you did. You did a beautiful job on Stingray, and you do it differently. I don't use a Gaia. You used a Gaia. I like the way you did a number of different things differently that I've picked up from. I think those cases are invaluable when you have highly skilled operators or colleagues that you can learn from. And I'm sure you're the same way. I mean, I learn every time I go to one of these conferences. I learn something different that somebody's doing that makes a lot of sense that you hadn't thought of, and you're thinking, well, why weren't we doing it that way? But that's how the field evolves. And so I remember those more than anything. I remember my mistakes, and I remember cool tips and tricks that colleagues I respect have done.
So do you go after the case? Do you, like the cases that are memorable, do you just go over them again and again? You present them? How do you actually get back to them and learn from them?
Yeah, I do. It's funny. You were so smart early on, and Stefan was about databasing, and it's made huge things. I mean, I was in private practice, so we were not doing much databasing. I did a lot of self-cataloging. So I would keep from the unfortunately pre-Excel fixated folks. I had
paper, works.
And so I wrote them down there. We used to have cards that I would keep, so I stacked all the cards of all the cases that I had done, and then we'd organize them by different techniques that were done, so you could go back and pull them. And I think reviewing those over and over, I think, are incredibly helpful. It's one of the nice things too. Like you'd said, we got to teach a bunch, and we ran so many courses, so you were constantly showing cases, so you're always going back through your kind of neat cases and making them into PowerPoints and reviewing them with other folks that you were teaching. So I was very fortunate in the fact that we had kind of a pretty strong teaching scenario back in Pennsylvania, and obviously the teaching here at Emory is unparalleled for me.
So you've been teaching people forever, and actually I must say that some of the best images that are in the manuals that we do are from you, like the venture and the hydroplaning. I mean, all these things, you've got amazing pictures. How did this happen? Do you always have a passion for art and photography and making them very visual? How did that work?
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, so I was actually a studio art major in college. So I did my honors in studio art, and then did medical illustration for a couple of years while I was in medical school, and always thought that's what I would do. I really thought I wanted to be a plastic surgeon because I thought it would kind of merge art and medicine. And I actually had a fellowship. I came into medicine very late. I had a 6-year 3-and-3 fellowship for general surgery and plastics to do that, and had an epiphany that I was wondering if I was really going to be a doctor if I did that for the rest of my life. So I changed at the last minute, but it's always been something that's sort of continued through the years. I don't do as much art as I'd like to anymore, but it still kind of lends itself. And I think it's good. It's really nice if you can draw out what you're thinking and you're able to illustrate it. For me, it helps me think mentally through the cases. I think it helps a lot of times too with things I see on fluoroscopy are a little bit different. I think I see things a lot more 3D than maybe some of the people you're trying to explain how things are interplaying. So I think having that background has certainly been interesting to have, and it certainly lends itself to some creativity as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you also not only you creating the illustrations, but also you've been phenomenal at televising and teleproctoring and showing people what you do in courses and one-on-one. So how did that passion come from? Was it just a natural evolution, or is it something you enjoy and you like to do?
Yeah, it's great. I mean, I think it's I do enjoy it. I mean, I think it's you talk about being anxiety ridden. I'm sure that is for you too when you're running these courses and doing these live cases and trying to organize things. It's always got a lot of elements that are involved and a lot of things that you're trying to make sure go well. But you can't beat it. I mean, for doing, especially for when I was in Pennsylvania, like, for the most part, most of my days were not teaching days. So, I mean, you're basically doing, kind of, magic tricks in a closet. I mean, there's nobody there to teach, and it's fun, but I mean, there's more, I think it's a lot more enjoyable when you're able to help bring somebody else along or teach or show what you're doing. And even if they don't go do CTOs, they're going to learn certain skills or techniques, guide control, different microcatheter utilization that would be helpful. So, I mean, that made it a lot of fun. I think here for me, like, I've shifted here to Emory about coming up on 2.5 to 3 years. I mean, that's been the absolute highlight of being here. I mean, the fellows are fantastic and smart as can be and super enthusiastic. And so that's really, I think, fulfilled like a void that I that was trying to do by doing all the live courses and all the training sessions. But it was a growth and a natural progression. I'll say I didn't do any of it until, it's funny, I was asked a number of times to do them into proctor and all that. I turned it down for 3 or 4 years because I didn't think I was good enough at the time to do it. And I think that's one thing that always sort of makes me a little hesitant when you watch folks nowadays. I mean, I was doing CTOs pretty seriously for probably 3+ years before I would go do anything or be the last thing you want to do is promote yourself to be an expert until you are, especially if you are going to be talking people through things that potentially have some dangers and you need your experience and your skill set to be where you're really able to do that. And for some people, that's a fast progression and they're talented and they have great ability to understand. And I think it's a lot more well laid out since the books that you've put out that like walk people through and they can actually have a resource that you can actually go learn. But so much of that, people were even early on, we were learning kind of on the job, and the hybrid algorithm came out, since I've been doing CTOs, and, so like there were so many things that I'm not sure we clearly understood how or what we were doing. We knew some of it, but I think now it's so much more available for people that really want to get the expertise. I mean, to go and read your manual and going through it. I mean, it's invaluable to have all the algorithms within the algorithm and how you lay out the book. I mean, and that just wasn't as clear at the time. So maybe that rapidity of progression from starting to being responsible for teaching, proctoring, doing live cases, maybe that's a faster climb than what it was early on.
Do you feel, I know you have experience in live cases like no one else, but do you feel pressured all the time and everything else? Do you wish live cases were given more time? I mean, what is always this balance, right? You don't finish the case, you're in a rush to finish on time. How do you handle this mental pressure on top of everything else?
It's definitely real. I think, you don't get nervous much anymore, in the lab, but there's times on the live cases where you still feel a little shaky in the hands and things like that, it's definitely, anxiety ridden. I think my biggest fear is crossing the CTO too quickly, because my fear is having to talk for 20 or 30 minutes. I'd much rather be doing something, but I think it definitely leads to a night that you don't sleep much the night before. I don't know. Do you still stay up all night worrying about them, or do you just?
No, I usually am so tired I don't. But
I need to work harder.
No, but it's definitely, it's a great educational tool and nothing to replace it. And seeing people work, I think nothing can compare to that. Now, when you have a new fellowship program for complex, which is not that many in the US, and obviously that's very popular. But how do you select the people who part of this? Can you tell someone is going to be a great one, complex operator? Do you have a sixth sense to feel it? How do you select people? And can you tell someone is going to be a great operator or not from the beginning?
Yeah, I don't think you can. I think it's certain people that seem like they have good hands. I think so much of it is a mental growth. I think if the people that are really obsessed with it, the people that really go home and live these cases and rethink these cases and try to figure out how things would have been different, the people that read a bunch through the different avenues that are available for complex PCI now, those are the people. I think you get them for a year. So I mean, if you give me somebody who's intense, intellectually honest, and somebody that's going to work, I think you can make anybody a really, really good chip operator. I think you need some requisite kind of baseline knowledge and skills from being in the cath lab to start with. But the biggest thing to me is the enthusiasm and the commitment to it. I'm convinced, and I would think you would be too. I'd be curious to hear what you think. But that if you give me that, in a year in enough cases, I can make you good. And I think you occasionally have folks that are, our chip fellow, both of them right now are just extremely talented as far as hands and skills, and they do guide manipulation in ways that took me years of practice to figure out, and it comes almost. It's almost intuitive to them. And so they're obviously going to be unbelievably good, because now they're starting out further down the road, and then they're getting a great exposure to what Wissam and Stefan and myself get to teach these guys. And I think that there's a definite trajectory they can be on that's faster, but I'm not sure it's necessary. I think that at the end of the day, as long as you give me somebody that's intelligent, enthusiastic, and has intellectual honesty, integrity, so they know when they did something right, they know when they did something wrong, they're not trying to just look the other way, you can make them really, really good. How about you? Do you think that there's some baseline skill set that you need, or any kind of special things you look for when you kind of eyeball who your next people are going to be?
No, absolutely. I mean, I'm with you. I think a big part of this is the attitude. If the attitude is, humble, I want to learn, as honest, and try to work hard, I think it's going to be fine. I think is a kind of a warning sign for me is people who get very overconfident in the very first day, want to impress you of how good they are and how they know. I get super nervous, because then I know that there's not enough break.
There's no question. That's the whole Dunning-Kruger curve. The less experienced, the more confident. And so, that's the dangerous people. That's for sure. Yeah, it's always the people that's in the first week of fellowship that want to grab the wires and give it a shot before, I don't even know that they know what they're looking at. But then you have the other end, and I think that's one thing I think people need to realize is the growth will happen, over time. It's just a matter of going through the steps and the processes and making sure that you're, processing and internalizing what's happening and build on it. And I think a year's a long time. I mean, you take somebody for a year with, we're doing 350 to 400 CTOs somewhere throughout the system here. That's a lot of exposure that somebody gets in a year's time. And so I think if they're just patient but they need to work. I mean, it needs to be something to go home and obsess about. It shouldn't be the kind of thing where, there's a series of things that was an algorithm of how to handle, a challenge in a case, and then a week later you encounter it again, and it's this is my first day again kind of thing. It needs to be something where they went home and grilled that in and drilled it so that that's a reflex response, and so that's the only way you can kind of add layers on top of the knowledge, but you gotta build on it.
Yeah, nothing like that. I like the passion and doing your homework. And actually, I love it when the next day they come and they have new ideas about what could you have done different the previous day.
Yeah.
I mean, it's absolutely a good sign that things are going to go well.
It's absolutely true. Yeah.
So what excites you the most right now? I mean, you obviously started the amazing program at Emory. You already had a great program at York. What is the exciting thing for you?
It's a fun question. I mean, I think like we talked about a little bit earlier offline, I have a device coming out, which I'm excited about, and I had this concept that we fail on antegrade dissection reentry because of the hematoma that we form, and it kind of compresses the true lumen and makes it so we can't visualize because you're out compressing the collateral filling, so we lose visualization. You make a very slit-like target that you're trying to get back into. I have a device that Teleflex bought that's going to be coming out in the next few months that I think is going to make reentry very predictable. So I mean, it's a aspiration simultaneous with reentry, and so it works through 6 ports that'll aspirate the hematoma in a catheter that's much like a turnpike in design, but a little bit bigger. It's 3 French, and so you can aspirate and manipulate a wire at the same time that you're doing both together, and so it's not just one at a time. And it dries really nicely, and I think it's going to get us to the point where I think. And it's not going to make CTOs easy, because making the the dissection and getting to a reentry zone is still difficult, and oftentimes I think as difficult as anything else. And, especially when there's true ambiguity and things like that. So, but I think if you can get to a reentry spot, I think you'll get back in. And I think, when you do things like STAR, where you just send a knuckle down, and then I'm sure Iva said a lot like I do, and you can see areas where the true lumens collapse the whole way, and you're like, oh, wow, if it had just popped in up here instead of down there, we would be all set. But you've got this tiny little, true lumen in a big kind of hematoma in the or the, extraluminal space, and the adventitia, trapped by the adventitia. I think you'd be able to put this catheter in there, hook it up to suction, expand the true lumen, and stick back in kind of strategically wherever you want. And I think it'll make reentry. Whereas, and the data from Progress. I mean, but if you said the best reentry operators in the world are maybe in the 70% range, and that's probably generous. But I think it's hard to believe that we've been doing reentry since whatever 2011, 12, 10, something
more
like
than
that.
10 years.
Yeah, and I mean that's still where I'm at. I mean, I don't know if everybody else is, but I mean, I think if I got 7 or 8 out of 10 Stingray cases that I was planning on doing that way, I'd be pretty proud of myself. And I think, we were, and if you do it the rest of the country, I mean, it's probably 50% on a really, really, really good day. And so this, I think that's why antegrade dissection reentry hasn't taken off, is because it doesn't work predictably for everybody. Sure. I think this is going to change that. It'd be very interesting. I mean, I think, the case that we have in Paraguay was pretty dramatic as far as how it worked, and it's very simple. And so I think if we can get there, so I think a lot of retrograde will go away, and I think all of Stingray will go away, and I think a lot of cases that we wouldn't have done ADR, I think we will. I think a lot of stars you'll be able to bail out. I think a lot of iatrogenic accidental guide dissections on a person that didn't have a CTO, that you suddenly shut down a vessel, and the whole, which is obviously a totally different animal. I mean, all hell breaks loose. They have chest pain, VT, everything else, ST's up. I think you'll be able to put this in the false lumen, hook it up to suction, re-expand the true lumen. So I think there's times it's going to bail people out of real catastrophic events, which will be fun to see. I mean, this will be the third patent I've gone through, and this will be the first device that I think. Other ones, one wasn't in the interventional field, but this will be the first device that I think will be out there. It'll be really exciting to kind of see how it affects, the procedure, whether it really, shifts the needle as much as I think it will. But, you never know till you get it in people's hands that you respect and let them figure it out. But I'm excited for that. That's going to be over the next few months, hopefully, that'll be out and available. And that's got FDA clearance and everything. So it's up to Teleflex how they do it, but it's in their hands now. So.
Yeah, no, congratulations. Again, I mean, there's very few people who can say, they took the concept and they move it all the way from development to something that can be genuinely useful. And as you know, Stingray is probably the only device in CTOs in the last decade that actually worked. So I can't wait to see the new and improved modality to do the same work.
Yeah. No, I talked to you about it 3 or 4 years ago back at CTO Summit, and it took a solid 3 years. It takes a lot of money, a lot of time, but it's an experience. I mean, it certainly is. And I think if I would enjoy maybe getting more into that arena as time goes by, and maybe less in the cath lab. We'll see.
Oh, no, don't get any ideas. But but what are your plans? Speaking of which, what are your plans for long term? Are you planning to cath forever? Are you planning to cut back at some point in 20, 30 years maybe?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, my dad was my partner up in Pennsylvania. That's why I went to Pennsylvania in the first place. And he's 78 now. Still sees patients a couple of days a week. He stepped out of the lab about 2 or 3 years ago. And so I don't think I want to do that. I've had, 6 hernia operations and, get back pain and everything else like that. So, I don't know how much longer I would want to be fully in the lab. I love it. It's fun and the teaching's a blast. But I think, I'd like to start to look a little bit at some other opportunities over the next 5 years or so, maybe some administrative opportunities, or maybe some research and development. So sure. Ideas. Yeah.
And what keeps you in good shape to keep up with all the activities you're doing, all the case and everything else? Do you exercise? Do you read? What do you do to keep you kind of recharged?
I don't run as much as you run, because every time you hear us see how running, but I run usually 3 days a week, and then try to, how it is. Our schedules are ridiculous, and I fly up to to Baltimore, Pennsylvania area every weekend or every other weekend. So it's hard. I mean, you do a lot of running, a lot of work, and so it's hard to stay in shape that much. I do, and I still enjoy art, and so I still have several books on architecture and art from different cities I like to read through. That's enjoyable at night, but most of the time spent working or traveling, to be honest.
Well, that's your passion, right? So that's actually counts as a hobby too.
That's right.
And then, what are you most proud of, inside and outside medicine?
I think that's a good question. I'm really proud of as far as in medicine, I'm really proud of the kind of different phases I've gone through. I mean, I think of, much like you, I mean, I think I was very academically oriented coming through. I did a chief residency year. I thought that's what I would want to do. But the opportunity to work with my dad for 14, 15 years was just a great experience. We became really, truly best friends, and I wouldn't trade that for anything. And then the chance to pivot and come back, to Emory and have the opportunity to do this here has been something I'm really grateful for. And I think, the people here with, Bob Taylor and Angel Leon were the two that kind of recruited me down here, and they've been great to me. They've followed through on everything. I think it's been a fun experience. I think we've pushed Emory back out into the center stage on a lot of things again, which has been great. So, I mean, that's been super enjoyable. And I think, it's, the teaching aspect here has been tremendous. And I think, and then they combine that with, I've got 2 kids that are just great, and they do everything right. And so it's been a combination of a lot of hard work from different folks to be involved, because certainly, there's large voids or gaps where you're not there because you're out doing other stuff. And I think, that it turned out tremendous. And so I think those are probably the things I'd be most proud of.
Thanks again, Bill. Congrats. That was, again, an amazing overview and amazing career so fast. And there's many, many things we're expecting from you, so don't get any ideas now. But in closing, any advice you have for people who are early in their career, they're thinking of becoming like yourself, cheap city operators, any piece of advice you would give them?
Nothing beats hard work. That's it. I mean, I think none of this happens by accident, and none of it happens, through serendipity or luck. It's work. I mean, it's hard work, and I mean, it's better than anybody. It's an unbelievable number of hours that you spend above and beyond what any of us do. I mean, you're the hardest working person I think I've ever met, and I mean, you cannot overemphasize how important that is. And I think I can't tell you how many times at 5:30, 6 o'clock on a Friday evening, I was toiling away with a CTO with my dad. We were there till 9 o'clock at night, and you say, like, well, why, how come you can do this? How come you understand that? Or why can't you? It's hours and hours and hours of work. And I mean, there's just not a substitute. And I think if you don't love it, it's not what you should do. I mean, I think there's plenty of other people that go into medicine are all in all very, very smart, very brilliant people. If you don't love it, you can do anything else you want to do. I mean, the doors are all open. If you really enjoy it though, and you really put the hours in, it's a very, very fulfilling job. I mean, and I think, the one thing that is sort of remiss in everything we talked about, teaching and everything else. I mean, the most amazing thing is how many patients you get to help that are doing poorly or sick or don't have other options, and you're able to give them something that other people a lot of times can't offer. And so I think when you get to that level of experience and abilities, the combination of all those things is just, to me, it's unmatched. I don't know what else I would do if I wasn't doing this. So.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Bill. And you're absolutely right. The goal of all this is to help the patient. So again, phenomenal work all over these years. It's been a pleasure working with you on multiple fronts, and look forward to working to continue to work with you down the line. Thanks again so much, and thanks for taking the time today.
All the best, man. You're the best. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Sensei podcast.